We got another
Come on, let's
This is
see
not
it.
the right stick, right?
Yeah.
No,
Let's see it.
but you actually got it?
No, you have to use the real one.
Okay.
You have to use the real one.
What if I miss?
Hey, that's okay. I don't
you're
know.
a strikeout.
She's not going to be able to sleep tonight
I
if she
don't know.
misses.
Come
All
on,
right, you're having a little boy.
nobody
You got to know how to
pitches
play
to
this.
you?
No, you bounce it to yourself.
Okay,
Come on, let's
I'm
see
afraid. I'm afraid. I'm
You got this, you got
gonna
this.
miss.
Don't go into labor.
Trash talk.
A lot of sponsors are going to be helping us out.
Yeah, we have Cortez Sport Fishing is sponsoring the event, so they're out of Seaforth Landing. We're having a party at 98 Bottles tomorrow, kind of opening ceremonies starting at 7.
All right. Hey,
Linda,
thanks
do you
so
want
much.
to take another? Do you want to take another
I can
stab
try.
at it?
I can try. We're out of time. We're out of time. But
No, let Linda
so we're
take
just going to
another
go to
stab
a
at it.
generic
That's
break
what
whenever you
everyone
guys have
wants to
to. Brian and the
satellite and radar picture as we look at Tropical Storm Hermine. A very well-defined eye here, and you can see the rain wrapping around the eye. We are going to see this strengthen to a hurricane very, very briefly as it moves towards the Florida Panhandle. You can see some of the rain out ahead of this here. Look at that line of thunderstorms here. The deep red shading, that's really heavy rainfall. And we've got a second round of it coming right behind associated with the storm. As we take a look at the watches and warnings in the area, you'll see a hurricane warning, which is the red here on your screen, because the storm will strengthen to have 74-mile-per-hour winds. That is the lowest threshold for Category 1 status, so it's barely going to reach Category 1, and then it will weaken to a tropical storm as it pushes out over towards Georgia into South Carolina. So here's the track of Hermine. You can see right now over the Gulf coasts and then pushing into the Florida Panhandle later on tonight. It'll continue to push towards Georgia and get into South Carolina as we move into Friday afternoon, and then it's going to move fairly quickly up the rest of the East Coast and back off to sea. The other tropical threat that we're watching right now around Hawaii, Tropical Storm Madeline, skirting just south of the Big Island today, and then Hurricane Lester will be right on its heels. So Madeline, again, tropical storm strength. We're seeing some of those winds battering the Big Island right now, also some heavier rain, but we're really keeping our eye on Lester because that one is going to remain a hurricane as it skirts to the north of the islands. It'll be well to the north of the Big Island, at least according to the current trajectory, and then as it pushes past Oahu, it'll still be a Category 1 storm, and that'll be into Saturday. But you can see the cone of uncertainty, so if this thing tracks a little bit further south, Oahu and some of the other smaller islands, Maui, could take a direct hit. Locally, we have a much different picture. We're taking a live look outside in Fallbrook. That's all low cloud coverage there. You see the clouds basically down to the deck in Fallbrook this morning, and visibilities are reduced to nothing up in Fallbrook. So you want to be careful as you make your way outside in your morning commute in Fallbrook. You're going to have a hard time this morning with those clouds down on the ground. And we could also be seeing some sharply reduced visibilities in between some of these reporting stations. So keep that in mind. Give yourself a little extra time this morning, especially up in North County where we've been seeing those low visibilities. The clouds should clear between 9 and 10 o'clock this morning, maybe a little bit later for the coastline. Temperatures will be cooler into the afternoon, especially for our inland spots. We'll be in the 70s at the coast, but the low 80s in Lemon Grove and Kearney Mesa, 88 for El Cajon. That's several degrees cooler than the 90s we saw yesterday. We'll barely get into the 90s in Escondido, Poway, Valley Center, and Ramona today, and will remain in the mid-80s in Rancho Bernardo and San Marcos. The mountains will also be in the 80s, 105 in Borrego. We have a slight chance of seeing isolated thunderstorms for our mountain communities today. We'll talk more about that, plus a major cool down into your holiday weekend, all coming up here in just a few minutes. But first, let's get you caught up on traffic. Coastline 84 in Mira Mesa, 88 out in El Cajon, and 80 in Otay. The mountains will also be in the 80s and will hit 105 in Borrego, but temperatures will be a lot cooler today in some spots than what we saw yesterday. We're going to drop 7 degrees in Ramona and Alpine, cool 5 degrees in Escondido, Poway, and Campo, and will be 6 degrees cooler in Lakeside and out in Borrego. We do have a slight chance of isolated thunderstorms for the mountains and deserts today. You can see some of the moisture out over toward Arizona, edging toward the California border, kind of headed our way. So we have that slight chance, but as we put the high-resolution computer model into motion, you'll notice the thunderstorm activity staying out towards Brawley and El Centro into the afternoon, and San Diego County staying dry. So it looks like we're going to largely miss that threat, but maybe we'll get a little bit of cloud cover and also some gusty winds, but I want to mention it just in case it does develop. Area of low pressure moving into Pacific Northwest, kind of getting a reinforcing wave behind it, allowing this big dip in the jet, and that's going to keep us cooler in the coming days. We have more of that sea breeze influence, and That'll mean more low cloud coverage and also cooler temperatures. Look at this temperature trend for the deserts. 106 today, still fairly warm into tomorrow, but temperatures nosediving into the weekend into the low 90s. And we're going to cool off significantly pretty much everywhere but the immediate coastline as we move into the weekend. The coastline, the cooling will be more subtle. We'll see cloudy skies into the afternoon. For our inland spots, though, a noticeable cool down. 88 degrees today, down to 78 by Saturday. Yeah, a big cool down. Today we're going to notice it inland, but it's not going to be nearly as cool as when we head into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Temperatures today largely in the 70s and 80s. We'll have a handful of low 90s mixed in, dropping as much as 7 degrees today over what we saw yesterday. Mountains and deserts have a 10% chance of isolated thunderstorms. We'll talk all about the cool down and the chance of storms coming up in just a few minutes. Carrie? I look outside in Fallbrook, where we also have clouds down very close to the ground and visibility sharply reduced. So those clouds are west of the mountains this morning, going to lead to cooler temperatures today, dropping as much as 7 degrees over what we saw yesterday. We do have a slight chance of thunderstorms in the mountains today, but we're also going to see much cooler weather as we move towards the weekend. Current visibility is down to the deck in Fallbrook, where again clouds are down as low as 200 feet. I think we're seeing some sharply reduced visibilities in between some of these reporting stations, because from that live look from SDCCU, you saw that visibility was reduced. So those clouds will clear by about 10 o'clock this morning for most locations, possibly lingering a little bit longer for the coast. Temperatures today dropping 1 to 7 degrees, bringing us largely into the 70s and 80s, with a few low 90s mixed in. The mountains will also be in the 80s today. It'll be 105 out in Borrego. Temperatures dropping 7 degrees in Ramona and Alpine today, cooling 6 degrees in Borrego and Lakeside, and down 5 degrees in Poway, Escondido, and Campo. So a noticeable cool down for some of our inland spots. Temperatures now dropping below average for this time of year in a number of locations, but remaining slightly above average for Escondido and Ramona. That will change in the coming days. First, let's talk about that chance of thunderstorms. You see some moisture out over toward Arizona, edging toward the California border, heading up to the north and to the west. So it could clip us later today. But as we take a look at the high resolution computer model, it shows the bulk of the activity staying out over towards Imperial County, edging Brawley and El Centro, maybe even Ocotillo, but not moving towards us. The bigger picture, the western satellite and radar picture, we've got an area of low pressure pushing into the Pacific Northwest, a reinforcing wave coming in behind it. This is causing that big dip in the jet stream, which is allowing our temperatures to stay cooler. We'll get more of that sea breeze influence, and that will drop our temperatures significantly heading into the weekend. The deserts today around 105 degrees, but into the weekend, look at that nosedive of the temperatures down into the 90s, so well below average for this time of year. The cooling along the coastline will be a little bit more subtle, but for our inland spots, mountains and deserts, very noticeable. Today, the inland and the really well-defined circular motion around the storm and some of that heavier rain. So let's zoom on in, where you can see some of the yellows and oranges indicating moderate to heavy rain. The reds, kind of the extreme downpours. We have a line of thunderstorms that will be approaching the the Florida Panhandle and Tampa as we move into the morning and afternoon today. You can see there is a hurricane warning in effect. That's the red here on your screen. Tallahassee, you're under that. And that's because, again, it is going to strengthen very briefly to a Category 1, hitting those 74-mile-per-hour winds. Tropical storm warnings in effect for Georgia up into South Carolina, even portions of North Carolina. Let's look at the track of Hermine here. Again, still over the coastal waters, but strengthening to a Cat 1 right before it makes landfall and remaining a Cat 1 as it moves ashore. But then it will weaken to a tropical storm into Friday morning and remain a tropical storm as it pushes up through the Carolinas and then off the sea, off to the Atlantic Ocean. Let's take a look at the threat in Hawaii, though. You can see that Tropical Storm Madeline is skirting to the south of the Big Island right now. And we are seeing tropical storm force winds, but barely. So that means the 30 to 40 mile per hour wind range. But we have Hurricane Lester right on its heels. It's a Category 1 storm, and it will remain a Cat 1 as it moves to the north of the Big Island. Now, take a look at the forecast fan. If this storm tracks a little bit down to the south, it could make a direct hit on islands like Maui and Oahu. But right now, it does look like it will stay to the north. Let's take a look at our local weather. We're waking up to low cloud coverage. We're looking live at San Miguel, and there's that blanket of low cloud coverage that's extending a little bit farther inland this morning than what we saw yesterday. We're also seeing sharply reduced visibility up in Fallbrook, with clouds down to the deck. Visibility is down to nothing in Fallbrook, and I think we are probably seeing some reduced visibilities in between some of these reporting stations in North County. So be careful as you make your way out this morning. You'll probably run into those patches of low clouds. By the afternoon, we'll have mostly sunny skies and cooler temperatures. Slight cooling at the coastline, but more dramatic cooling inland, where temperatures will be as much as 7 degrees cooler, dropping back into the 80s with a couple low 90s mixed in. But we'll hit 84 in San Marcos, 85 in Rancho Bernardo, 90 in Escondido and Poway. The mountains in the 80s this afternoon, 105 in Borrego. We have a slight chance of thunderstorm activity for these locations. We'll talk more about that, plus the major cool down in our weekend forecast coming up in just a few. It's going to change here in the coming days. We have a slight chance of thunderstorm activity later today. You see the moisture edging towards California from Arizona, taking that north-west trajectory. So we may get clipped with a couple isolated thunderstorms into the afternoon, but it looks like most of that activity is going to stay out over toward Brawley and El Centro into the 4 and 5 o'clock hour. We do have an area of low pressure moving into the Pacific Northwest, a broad area of low pressure that's causing this major dip in the jet stream. That's going to give us more of a sea breeze influence in the coming days and cool our temperatures off significantly anywhere away from the coastline. Coastline will see subtle cooling, more of that cloud cover, just a few sun breaks into the afternoon, but our inland spots dropping into the mid, even low 70s interior. I'll give you that. All right, well, let's look live in Fallbrook this morning, where we still have the very low cloud coverage down to about 300 feet, reducing our visibilities here. We have overcast skies almost out to the foothills of the mountains this morning, and they're going to be slower to clear, which will lead to cooler temperatures today, dropping into the 70s and 80s for the most part. We also have a slight chance of thunderstorms in the mountains. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But take a look at that visibility up in Fallbrook, down in the deck with those low clouds again all the way down on the ground. So you want to be careful as you make your way out this morning. And we're probably seeing some sharply reduced visibility in between some of these reporting stations to the north. Again, the clouds clearing by about 10 o'clock for most locations, maybe a little bit later closer to the coastline. Temperatures today largely in the 70s and 80s, but we'll still see some 90s out through Poway, Alpine, Escondido, and Ramona. Mountains today in the 80s, 105 in Borrego. Temperatures dropping as much as 7 degrees over what we saw yesterday. We'll see that amount of cooling in Ramona and Alpine. It'll be 6 degrees cooler in Lakeside and Borrego, and down 5 degrees in Escondido, Poway, and in Campo. So temperatures now back below average for this time of year for the most part, but we will see slightly above average conditions for Escondido and Ramona. That will be changing, though, in the coming days. We have an area of low pressure here in the Pacific Northwest, a broad area of low pressure that's causing this big dip in the jet stream all the way down into California, bringing us an unseasonably strong sea breeze influence, and that is going to cool our temperatures off so much into the weekend. Take a look at our desert temperature trend, around 105 today, but in the low 90s by Sunday into Monday. So as we take a look at our 7-day forecast, you'll notice a subtle cooling trend at the coastline, but dramatic cooling for our inland spots, going from 88 today to 74 by your Labor Day month, down to about 10 degrees below average for this time of year. All right, the U.S. Sand Sculpting, roll up. Sand Sculpting Challenge is happening along the San Diego Bay over the long weekend. Ruben Galvan is out at the Embarcadero to give us a preview. Ruben?